peace, justice, human rights, and intercultural encounter. We focus on the Middle East, but really we focus on justice and the intersectional connections of justice. Justice and human rights works throughout the world. We focus on the Middle East, and we're really happy to have Max Blumenthal tonight as our guest. A few announcements. We want to say thanks to Plymouth Congregational Church, United Church of Christ, the pastors here, my pastors, Timothy Murphy and Ruth Phillips, and the executive council and all the people of Plymouth Church for really welcoming us into this sacred space for our programs. As you know, Plymouth has been a partner with us from the very beginning of our working 15 years ago. So we're really grateful to Plymouth Church. We have with us Ben Clemmer tonight from WBOI. So Ben, we're happy to have you. We're happy to have our friends from Friends of the Third World. Please stop and look at their wares. Am I right, Patty? They provided the coffee from Yemen tonight. So we're happy that Jim, you and Marion provided that for us tonight. So thank you very much. I don't usually do this, but I want to, we have a number of friends here in Fort Wayne, and Reverend Fran Frelick. Fran, you are a beautiful human being. And Fran had an op-ed or a letter to the editor this morning in the paper. Silencing Israel's critics abridges free speech. And Fran, I've read this 2 or 3 times. I'm not sure I could have written, every word was just right on target. So Fran, I just personally want to say thank you. And we all want to say thank you to you for your efforts on our behalf and for the behalf of the Palestinian people. He's blushing. Each one of you received on your seats a flyer for upcoming programs. You know, we're really excited about the programs we've been able to provide this year so far. We've had a program on the Yemen humanitarian crisis. We've had Jeff Halper here to talk about the One Democratic State solution, the One Democratic State movement. Tonight we're hosting Max Blumenthal. A week from Saturday night we're hosting here in the sanctuary Dance of Unity, Dance of Peace, an evening with Rumi, Sufi music, and whirling dervishes. And I have to tell you, I first encountered the whirling dervishes in 1998 when I was in Istanbul and I met the Sheikh of the Helveti Jarahi Order of Dervishes, whose dergah is up near the Suleimani, the Mosque of Suleiman the Magnificent up in the hills. Those of you who've been to Istanbul know this place very well. And I spent a couple of evenings just having dinner with the dervishes and having conversations with the Sheikh because I'm very interested in Sufism and Rumi's poetry. Attended the Sema, the sacred dance of the dervishes, and the zikr, the meditation ritual of the dervishes. And it's been my dream ever since we moved to Fort Wayne to have a performance of the dervishes here. And so it's finally coming to fruition a week from Saturday night. You have the information in front of you on the flyer. We're so grateful to Plymouth Church for providing the space to host it. We have musicians, we have a chorus, we have 3, at least at last count, dervishes coming to do their sacred turning dance. What's exciting for me is that this is a women dervishes who are coming to do the turning dance, which is avant-garde, in the Sufi world. So we're hoping that you'll be able to join us. You have the information here. Joan, can you raise your hand, please? Joan's in the back. She'll take your money for tickets. If you are moved to do so tonight, we also will sell tickets at the door. But we hope that you'll be able to join us. the Beating Guns Tour on Palm Sunday in the evening. Shane Claiborne, some of you know his writing and his work. And we're going to set up a forge. We've already got approval from the fire marshal. We'll set up a forge across the street in the parking lot and beat a gun into a garden tool. And so we're excited about that. Talk about the gun culture in America. And then this just happened the last week, but Amira Haas, some of you were with me when we met with Amira Haas in Ramallah. The only Israeli journalist living in the West Bank covering Palestine. She'll be here on Thursday, May the 2nd. So we really have had a strong beginning of 2019. And I just want to say, and I say this with just so much gratitude, that you all, I'm looking around the room and I see so many friends and partners of the things we do. Each one of you has been an important part of our work. And I just want to say very humbly and gratefully thank you for your partnership in what we do. This is our 15th year. And you all have, many of you have been with us from the very start. And it's not lost on me. I just want you to know it's not lost on me.
And also bring the articles, and I keep bringing articles to you every time I see you.
Tony, you're amazing, man.
Even I can't go on the trip with you, I still keep up on, I keep reading paper, keep on things like that, you know.
You're amazing. And you know what? I read every article that you bring me.
Yes.
Thank you. So Max Blumenthal is an award-winning journalist. He's the editor of The Gray Zone. So if you want to find the stuff that he writes, grayzoneproject.com. Did I get that right, Max? grayzoneproject.com. He's a prolific writer, commentator, journalist, blogger, filmmaker, and author. He's written several books, including Republican Gomorrah, Inside the Movement That Shattered the Party, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel, which is an amazing tour de force, I think, of talking about Israel apartheid and the laws that the Israeli Knesset has passed that really define it as an apartheid state. The 51-day war, ruin, and resistance in Gaza. And then his latest film that he produced is Killing Gaza, and we'll have a screening of that in the next couple of months. Max, we're so grateful that you're here in Fort Wayne. Please come.
All right, you might have to move that around a little. I'm going to walk around like a mega church pastor, like Tony Robbins. You need to love you before you can love anybody else, you know. Thank you, Michael. Michael is a shepherd, and it's good to be with the flock. This is such an inspiring group to be with. I wouldn't be anywhere else. I came here straight from Venezuela, where I was for the last 2.5 weeks, because I wanted to be here with you because I'd heard so many good things about your group, and I wanted to see, learn from you guys. And one thing that I've learned from looking out at this room is to never trust anyone under 30. Where are the youth? Well, oh, there you go. All right, respect. Give this young person a hand. Anyway, you're the future. And I also want to thank you as a resident of Washington, D.C., for giving us Mike Pence. It's been wonderful. You know, that's our gift. You don't have to give him back. That's my gift to the good progressives of Fort Wayne, is we're holding on to him for you for now. And unfortunately, there are so many people who want to impeach Trump and make Mike Pence president. And I think that could be potentially dangerous unless you are rapture ready. Are you ready for the rapture? It's the second coming. Well, Mike Pence is your man. I will briefly talk about Venezuela, but you know, I just heard Michael say that your group was formed 15 years ago. And 15 years ago was 2004. I was still going through a process of de-Zionization. Even though I wasn't raised in a Zionist family, you know, it's just kind of part of the mainstream of American Jewish life. I had gone on the Free Birthright tour where, you know, Jewish people age 18 to 25 get a free trip to Israel and also get a free sex vacation. I actually didn't participate in that because I was so interested in the politics, but it was kind of like, you know, it was like one of those wild 80s movies like Caddyshack, plus Israeli soldiers with guns were everywhere. And, you know, that does something. It works on you. They say it'll build a lifelong connection between you and the land of Israel. And it worked on me, just not in the way that they wanted, because I started questioning. And I think all of you are here because you started questioning what you were hearing in the media about Palestine and what you had been told to believe about Palestinians being terrorists. And many of you decided to go on trips and to see the situation for yourself, and you got red-pilled. You had an epiphany where you saw that the situation was the exact 180-degree opposite of how it was presented to you in the US, in the West. And it's outrageous. And you become angry, and then you become dedicated. And then you start thinking, for me at least, I started to think about everything differently, because Palestine and its dispossession was not just a Zionist project, it was a project guaranteed by US empire. And so I started to have to reevaluate as I moved through watching the destruction of Jenin refugee camp in 2002, then the destruction of southern Lebanon in 2006 and southern Beirut, what Condoleezza Rice called the birth pangs of a new Middle East, but which was actually, as my friend Katie Halper said, the episiotomy of a new Middle East. Then I watched the destruction of Gaza in the first real major assault with 2,000-pound and 5,000-pound bombs on the Gaza Strip during Operation Cast Lead in December 2008, January 2009. And I decided, as someone who'd established himself in the media, that I would dedicate a portion of my career to going to the region and exposing Americans to the real Israel they didn't know, and the real Palestine they weren't told about. That I had to reevaluate everything, and I had to reevaluate all of the other countries and peoples that were misrepresented to us in our media. Right now, Russia and Russians are the official enemy, and I think a little bit differently about that, and think we're being dragged into a new Cold War, and we're being subjected to a disinformation campaign to justify a record defense budget and make us afraid of dissent, just as we were during the first Cold War, and to not only demonize candidates like Donald Trump, who could easily be demonized on the facts of who he actually is, but also Bernie Sanders, and you will see that this campaign will be used against Bernie Sanders. I started to think differently about the whole Middle East and about our project of regime change, and I had to think about what the consequences of regime change in Syria would be, and how we were being propagandized and lied into supporting another war, that would have turned Syria into Libya, which now has open-air slave auctions and has seen its own cities come under the control of Al-Qaeda affiliates and ISIS when it was previously one of the most prosperous and stable nations in Africa. And I decided to reject the calls for regime change in Syria. And so, not only having been demonized as an anti-Semite over Palestine, I was now demonized as a Russian spy and an Assadist. And so I recently went to Venezuela because this is the latest country targeted with regime change. Why? Because of course we want human rights and democracy, right? We really care about that. That's why Oprah Winfrey and half of Hollywood welcomed Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, to here and rolled out the red carpet for him before he chopped Jamal Khashoggi into pieces, or had him chopped into pieces in the Istanbul. We care about human rights and democracy. Oh wait, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world and is under the control of an elected socialist-oriented government which uses that oil to fund social programs and has not only stymied the U.S. plans for Venezuela, but also has ejected the Israeli ambassador and the Israeli embassy from Venezuela in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I was able to see the vice president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, speak to a group of hundreds of young people from around the world who had come in solidarity. And when she got up before that crowd, the vice president of Venezuela appeared with a Palestinian kufiya around her neck to emphasize the importance of Palestinian solidarity. Meanwhile, Juan Gualdo, who no one had ever heard of in Venezuela before he was appointed president, thanks to a phone call from one Mike Pence, interim president, at the beginning of a failed coup attempt, Juan Gualdo has declared that he will restore relations with Israel and has reached out to Benjamin Netanyahu to do so. So many, and I don't think this is at the center of it, but so many of the nations of the world that declare solidarity with oppressed peoples and puts Palestine at the center become targeted for a regime change by the US, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iran, whether it's Venezuela. It's often there. And when a far right-wing leader is elected with support of evangelicals in their own country or other far right-wing white nationalist elements, Benjamin Netanyahu is often the first foreign visitor, as he was in Brazil when the far-right extremist Jair Bolsonaro, an admitted admirer of Augusto Pinochet, was recently elected there, paving the way for this coup attempt in Venezuela. And so what I saw in Venezuela, it was a lot like what I see in Palestine. 180 degrees different from the way it's been portrayed in the US. They absolutely have an economic crisis there. There's no denying that. But the humanitarian crisis and the dystopia, no, it actually looks like life as usual. People are at peace. Venezuela is stable. People are going about their lives. And in very poor communities that I visited, when they found out that I was an American, they came up to me to tell me that they would fight and die for the revolution that they had, because before Hugo Chavez was elected in 1998, and he subsequently won 15 elections between 1998 and his death in 2013. Before he was elected, most of Venezuelan society was totally excluded. The darker skinned people, the poorer people, the working people, and now they have free health clinics. Now they have housing, 2.5 million free housing units. Now they have free education. They even have a free food program that prevents them from starving. There's no question there's an economic crisis. There's no denying that for me. But the humanitarian crisis was a fabrication of US media in collaboration with our national security state and the Venezuelan right-wing oligarchic opposition to justify a humanitarian intervention. And we need to question these things, not only because we question everything, but we need to question them because we're in solidarity with Palestine, and because nations like Venezuela stand up for Palestinians, and because those nations and the people who stand up for Palestine in your own communities are all going to become targets. We need to stand together. Now, Having said that, I would encourage you, you can visit my site, the Gray Zone Project, the Gray Zone. It's not a hair club for men. I called it that years ago, and I can't remember why, but the name just stuck. You know, we're facing a cease and desist letter from Gray TV, which controls a lot of your local media along with Sinclair Broadcasting, and it's why you see kind of the same message everywhere. But the Gray Zone, we're aiming to give you something different on all of the key issues where there's a consensus between MSNBC, CNN, and Fox. We're going to break the consensus. It's grayzoneproject.com, and we welcome your support. I am really excited to be in Fort Wayne, not only because it's such an exciting place that Harrison Ford also visits, I've just learned, but because I arrived the day after Mad Anthony Wayne got his day. I like Wayne Anthony better. It sounds like a serial killer. You know, serial killers all have 2 first names. It's like if your name is John Wayne something, you're going to be a serial killer. It's like if you're Jeeves, you're going to be a butler. If your name is Vince, you're going to be a bouncer. And if you're Anthony Wayne or Wayne Anthony, you're going to. And he was kind of a serial killer. And to Native Americans, to our indigenous population, he was a terrorist. And at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in August of 1794, he helped complete the destruction and dispossession of Native peoples. He spent much of the later part of his career, and I've just learned this thanks to you guys, dispossessing the Native population of Ohio. And I understand that there is that as strong as your group is, and as inspiring as your group is, there's stronger solidarity in Fort Wayne with the state of Israel. I think that's actually appropriate given the settler colonial legacy of this place and the fact that they've honored Mad Anthony Wayne. The former Israeli ambassador Michael Oren went to the State House in Colorado in 2011 after they signed a bill declaring their unwavering solidarity with Israel. And he said, "We have shared frontier values in Colorado and Israel." I don't know, he was referring to the Sand Creek massacre where babies were lanced to death. And that is really part of what connects this country, and especially Red America and Israel. I used to go jogging when I was staying in Jaffa, which is just south of Tel Aviv. It's essentially a Palestinian ghetto that's being gentrified out of existence, just south of Tel Aviv. I used to go jogging there on this path along the Mediterranean. You jog along these grassy dunes, and then you go by a house, and it's one of the last remaining Arab homes there that was in existence in 1948. And today it is the Etzel Museum. It is a museum dedicated to a terrorist group that participated in the massacre at Deir Yassin, a band of right-wing terrorists. And that Arab home used to belong to a family in the Manshia neighborhood. 50,000 people were, 30 to 50,000 people were ethnically cleansed from Jaffa, mostly from Manshia. They were literally pushed into the sea. You always hear pro-Israel groups say, they're going to drive us into the sea. They were literally driven into the sea. They went to Gaza, they went to Egypt, they went to Lebanon under heavy shelling. The Manshia neighborhood was completely bulldozed, and those dunes are not natural sand dunes, they are the ruins of homes, and people have barbecues on top of them. And so I think about that when I think about our own traditions here. It's different though in Israel. And I'm going to talk about that because the Palestinians are still in your face, resisting in a way that frightens Israelis about their own identity, Jewish Israelis, and their own existence. And every year on May 15th, Israelis observe their Independence Day, which for Palestinians is Nakba Day, the day of the catastrophe. And Israelis often like to go to a place called Canada Park, which is a forest planted by the Jewish National Fund, which is as unnatural as Joe Biden's hair plugs. It's not part of the land. They're pine trees, and they burn down very easily, but they were planted strategically because In 1967, there were 3 Palestinian villages there that jutted out into Israel like a thumb. And Ben-Gurion always wanted it removed so he could build a highway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And so during the 67 war, these populations were held at gunpoint and told to march to Ramallah, and then their villages were dynamited. The Jewish National Fund came in and built Canada Park with a big donation from the Canadian government on top of those villages so they could never return. And now it's a nice park where Israelis observe Independence Day atop the ruins of what was once Palestine. But Palestine is not gone. It's still there. There are 1.5 million Palestinian citizens of Israel. And from 1949 to 1966, they were subjected to a military occupation. People don't realize that Palestinians have been occupied since 1949, after Israel was founded in 1948. And there was a 6-month interregnum when they weren't occupied before 1967. And during that time, the first anti-democratic laws and this mass surveillance program that was more sophisticated than almost any other country had imposed, except perhaps France and Algeria, was put into place, beginning with the Prevention of Infiltration Act, which defined Palestinian refugees as infiltrators. The crisis that Israel faces with its own Palestinian citizens has become very severe, and it's led to the rise of the extreme right. And that's what my book Goliath is really about. And so I talk about laws like the so-called Nakba law, which aims to criminalize Palestinian observance of their own catastrophe, preventing them from mourning Israel's Independence Day and hoisting Palestinian flags on that day. And this was part of a swath of right-wing laws that culminated last year, with the nation-state law, which makes apartheid official, declaring that Israel officially belongs to the Jewish people, removing Arabic as an official language after 70 years when it was the second language of Israel, which means it won't be on signs or in school books anymore, and formalizing the second-class status of the Palestinian citizens of Israel. There's really no way you can deny that that is apartheid when it's passed by a massive amount in the Israeli Knesset, Israel's parliament, and signed into law by Benjamin Netanyahu. Is there? No, there isn't. And there's a special logic to this law that hints at what Israel's real agenda is. The agenda is annexation. The annexation of much of the West Bank, where Israel's settler population lives, to formally bring them into Israel. And the reason why this law is necessary is the Palestinians that live in those areas where the settlers are, which is most of the West Bank, Area C, they cannot demand the right to vote under this law. They are formally second-class or even fifth-class citizens. And so that's the danger of these laws, and it hints at what the agenda is, which is part of Jared Kushner's agenda, the presidential son-in-law, and why he is meeting with Gulf leaders right now to get the quote-unquote ultimate deal, is to doom the Palestinians of Jerusalem permanently, 300,000 of them, to a city which will never be theirs, and make the settlements a part of Israel, and give Area A, the gilded Bantustans of Ramallah, Nablus, Bethlehem, to a toothless Palestinian authority that will exist as a semi-state into eternity, while Gaza is slowly pushed into the sea, and the sea is pushed into Gaza. Because, as we know, the tunnels that have been part of Gaza's formal economy have been filled with seawater to prevent them from getting goods in. That's the agenda, and it's not an agenda that we get to debate or discuss because of the power of the Israel lobby, which produced Jared Kushner, whose family foundation has funded so many pro-Israel groups and so many settlements. Another reason we don't get to hear it is, how many of you have ever heard Jared Kushner talk? I mean, seriously, how many of you have even heard the sound of Jared Kushner's voice? Isn't that unusual that the point man on Middle East policy never talks about it before journalists? The only people he talks to are monarchs from Wahhabi kingdoms This is our Middle East policy. That's why groups like yours are so important, because we have to democratize our foreign policy, and we have to get in the ears of our leadership. I'm going to talk about Israel's election, and then I'm going to talk about our election, and then I'm going to talk about the Israel lobby that stands in our way. Israel's election is going to be another transitional election, as the 2009 election, which brought Netanyahu into power, was. It's why I started writing Goliath, because I knew that Israel was going to be a right-wing country as long as it was a Jewish state. There was a figure named Meir Kahane, many of you may have heard of, one of the most extreme figures in Israeli history. He actually comes from New York, and was a founder of the terrorist group, the Jewish Defense League, and Kach, which is officially outlawed in Israel, even though it's very influential in the settlements. When you hear about price tag attacks or settlement terror, it's Kach that's organizing it, and it's terror cells in the West Bank. Meir Kahane was banned from the Knesset. I think he's the only figure who's ever been banned by the Israeli Knesset in 1993, banned by a Likud right-wing government. Why? Not because he was such a racist, not because he called for the full ethnic cleansing of all Palestinians between the river and the sea, because he was a threat to Likud, because his message was so powerful among the youth of Israel. And what did he say? It was a very simple message that gets to the essence of Zionism and what Zionism is, and what Israel truly is today, which is that you cannot be a Jewish and democratic state, not because there's something wrong with Judaism. Judaism can be completely, just like Christianity and Islam, in line with democracy, but because when you define your state along ethnic lines in an area where most people do not fit that ethnicity, as with apartheid South Africa, you cannot be democratic. So he said, let's drop the pretense of democracy. Let's get it on. Let's be proud of being who we are. Let's be Jewish, and let's pass laws that get rid of these people who are constantly challenging our state's legitimacy, the Palestinians, and especially the Palestinian citizens of Israel. Today, that message is resonating, and it is part of the platform of every party within the Zionist spectrum in Israel, including and especially the Labor Party. So Netanyahu is facing some problems, although he's the most popular figure in Israel now and has the strongest base. We can get into that a little bit later. But he needed to have a strong coalition going into elections. And that means he needed to have a right-wing coalition without anyone from outside of the right. In order to do that, because it's a parliamentary system, you have an election list. And your list has to be long enough that you guarantee that you'll have a certain amount of seats in the parliament. And so to get a completely right-wing list, he had to strike a deal with two of the most extreme parties in Israel, which reflect the legacy of Meir Kahane, one of which is the party that is comprised of his terror cell leaders. It's called Otzma Yehudit, which means Jewish power. Jewish power. Very clear there. This is founded by one of his disciples, Michael Ben Ari, who I've interviewed, and I've also followed Ben Ari and his followers along with my colleague David Sheen as they embarked on an anti-African pogrom in Tel Aviv to intimidate and menace and attack the population of African asylum seekers living in Tel Aviv, which they have done on a weekly basis, inspiring race riots. You can watch that on YouTube. It's called Israel's New Racism. And that's who they are. They are literal terrorists that Benjamin Netanyahu, they're the Israeli version of the Ku Klux Klan, that Netanyahu wants to welcome into his parliament by merging them with the Jewish Home Party, which is a party of religious nationalist settlers led by a guy named Bezalel Smotrich, who has called for separate maternity wards for Jews and Arabs to prevent Jewish babies from becoming impure by being incubated next to Arab babies, who has led Beast Day, a Beast Day march on the day of the gay pride, LGBT pride parade in Tel Aviv as a joke in order to demonize LGBT people as beasts. These are the people that Netanyahu has welcomed into his coalition. On the other side, the blue and white party. Sounds like the good guys, right? Opposing these Klansmen who want to come into the parliament. On the other hand, I think they should actually rename themselves to the Blood Red Party, because 3 of the 4 leaders of this party are the figures who presided over the last 3 brutal operations against the Gaza Strip. Gabi Ashkenazi, the chief of staff, who presided over the butchery of Gaza in 2008-2009. Moshe Ya'alon, who was the defense minister for that attack, and Operation Pillar of Cloud, the assault on the Gaza Strip in 2012, and Benny Gantz, who presided over the slaughter in the Gaza Strip during Operation Protective Edge, the 51-day war that I wrote about in the summer of 2014, during which 551 women and children were killed and tens of thousands of homes were destroyed. And then Yair Lapid, who is basically the face of the party, who is an anti-Arab and anti-Orthodox Jewish centrist, right there in the center of Israeli politics. They're terrified of the ultra-Orthodox. Why? Because they don't want to serve in the military. That's where Yair Lapid comes in. Benny Gantz, who I just mentioned, has a commercial. He had a campaign commercial. You should watch it. Just go on YouTube, go on Google, look up Benny Gantz. It's spelled G-A-N-T-Z. I would have shown it. Campaign commercial. It's a commercial that shows drone footage of the destroyed neighborhood of Shujaiya, which was carpet bombed by Israeli jets and artillery howitzers. And it's just a bunch of rubble. And it says, Benny Gantz killed over 2,000 terrorists in the Gaza Strip in 2014. Vote for Gantz, strong as a rock. That's his commercial. He's not hiding from this record of human rights crimes, whatever you want to call it, alleged human rights crimes. He's selling it because that's where Israel's at after 50 years of occupation and 70 years of continuous dispossession of Palestinians. The occupation is home, and these are the figures. And I would argue that the blue and white party, for the average Palestinian living in the Gaza Strip, is far more dangerous than Netanyahu and the Klansmen, because they are far more likely to launch another assault. And Netanyahu, I hate to say this, might sound crazy, has actually demonstrated the tendency to show some restraint, because he prefers to use heated rhetoric, but to never get drawn into a war where Israeli soldiers could die, particularly against Hezbollah in Lebanon, which actually dealt Israel a bloody nose in 2006 and resulted in the collapse of that government and the humiliation of its defense minister and army chiefs. They had to disappear from public life forever. Netanyahu doesn't want to repeat that scenario. He wants to stay in power as long as possible. And so it'll be the occasional brutal operation, but it'll never be a massive escalation if he can help it. However, he can easily get pulled into a war. These other figures, they are more likely to overcompensate for being considered too soft on Palestinians by doing what they've always done and what they've been trained to do and what they boasted that they would do in election commercials. And so I think that it's an incredibly dangerous scenario. For us, however, those of us who are trying to make headway on Palestine, it's an opportunity, because Israel, in the eyes of progressives in the West and in the US, is pretty hard to sell these days. It is unsafe at any speed. It's a lemon. It cannot be marketed to progressives in all the greenwashing and the pink washing and the black washing and the brown washing and the hog washing, and the whole washing machine is broken and no Maytag man can put it back together anymore. And Benjamin Netanyahu being indicted yesterday for bribery is going to make it all that much harder. And watch his trial. He's going to try to turn his trial into a Donald Trump-style show against the fake news media and all of the establishment, and try to make himself a persecution victim against the system, and he could possibly get reelected again while being on trial. Interesting scenario for a country that used to market itself as the only democracy in the Middle East, and now simply says we're an island of stability in a sea of chaos, which it helped create. So you have groups like yours growing. You have Jewish Voice for Peace, the fastest growing Jewish group in the US, officially declaring its support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. I think last month. You have the polls, the Pew polls, showing that Democrats between ages 18 and 35 no longer favor Israel over Palestine, and Democrats overall are about even on the issue. And you have a clash in the Democratic Party that we saw play out in 2016 between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. There was a town hall during Operation Protective Edge where Bernie Sanders was confronted in 2014 by his constituents about the slaughter in Gaza, and he was furious. And he said, Israel has the right to defend itself. They are facing rockets. They are facing Hamas, which is not our moderate friends. And I believe in Israel's right to defend itself. And he yelled at them and he said, this is my town hall. You're going to sit down because I get very surly. I promised someone in this crowd that I would do a Bernie Sanders impersonation. And so here it is. And we're going to take down the millionaires and the billionaires. And I'm going to say that again and again. And it's going to be weekend at Bernie's. And he was furious. He was furious. And his constituents in Vermont, you know, this is where the hippies go to die, they wouldn't sit down. And they were screaming at him. And they kept on him. Bernie went to speak at a climate change event in New York next to Naomi Klein and Bill McKibben and all these other figures. And we got up with a banner protesting his position on the Gaza Strip. And then we let him speak. You know, I asked him if he had anything to say about Gaza. He walked away from me. Everywhere he went, people were telling him, we don't support you on this. We support you on pretty much everything else. You know, free college, Medicare for all, that kind of thing. And Bernie sort of started to get the message. I mean, of course he isn't where I am and where most of you are, but in a debate he challenged Hillary Clinton to her face about her total lockstep support for Benjamin Netanyahu, and he gained support. He showed that the Israel lobby no longer has total control over the presidential process and over the debate stage, and he benefited from it. And that was thanks to the grassroots support and the fact that he was supported by small donors, the fact that he didn't speak at AIPAC, and that was partly due to a petition that I launched, which got thousands and thousands of signatures, including from famous people like Roger Waters, who I wish was an American citizen who could run for president. And it had an effect, and we can have that same effect in a Democratic primary when you have pretty much 37% of every registered Democrat running for president. And one person that should be worked on if he runs is Beto O'Rourke. I don't know, his real name is Robert Francis, but he goes by Beto O'Rourke. It's like his rock star name or something. He's kind of being portrayed as the next Obama. You can tell that he's positioning himself as an Obama figure. He gets up and he makes these empty speeches where he says, we need to move forward to the better future of tomorrow and the future which we will enjoy, that our children will lead tomorrow, today. And then he kind of does that, and everyone's like, Beto! You know, make him take a position on Palestine. Because what he has done is he went into the House of Representatives and voted against funding Israel's Iron Dome system, which was part of the bill to support the slaughter of Gaza in 2014 that almost everyone else voted for, because he didn't realize you're not supposed to do that, and he thought that he could be a human being. Then AIPAC came in and started working on him, and the next thing you know, he's solidly pro-Israel and was trying to compete with Ted Cruz about who could be more pro-Israel in the Texas Senate race. Tell him that he needs to be a human being again and stop impersonating one. Tell him he needs to take a position, because he is someone that will have to depend on grassroots support if he is to get anywhere and get the name recognition he needs. And tell Kamala Harris that the people who walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, who she compared to supporters of Israel, are in fact like the people of Nabi Saleh and the family of Bassem Tamimi that try to walk to their own well and get clubbed in the head and shot with rubber bullets and shot in the legs with live bullets and tear gas and jailed and have their kids pulled out of their bed every night. Tell her that that's the real connection. And if she keeps up with this AIPAC shtick, where she's drawing tons of money from the pro-Israel lobby, then just not only don't vote for her, troll the crap out of her online. Speak out against her. Call her the cop that she is, because she is a cop. She was a career prosecutor who put lots and lots of poor people in prison, and she shouldn't be able to walk away from that, nor should Cory Booker be able to walk away from his history, his despicable history of palling around with the racist Rabbi Shmuley Botiach and taking loads of money not only from AIPAC, but from NORPAC, which was his largest donor, NORPAC, a right-wing pro-Israel group that is openly anti-Muslim, Islamophobic, and favored the bombing of Iran. Cory Booker is a pet project of the Israel lobby as well as the hedge fund-supported charter school industry. And Sharp James, the old mayor of Newark, was right. Cory Booker was a Trojan horse for corporate America and the Israel lobby when he came into Newark. And I tell you, when I covered the election after Cory Booker lost, and the son of Amiri Baraka, Ras Baraka, the famous radical poet, Ras Baraka, he won against a charter school, hedge fund supported candidate. People in Newark were cheering. They were saying, "We got our city back." Don't let Cory Booker get away with it again. These are the tools of the Israel lobby, and it's especially insidious. It's especially insidious that they are the ones who invoke the legacy of civil rights today. They shouldn't be allowed to do it. The legacy of civil rights is embodied in the BDS campaign and the Palestine Solidarity Movement. One last candidate I want to talk about that I find really interesting and compelling, who's been the target of a disinformation campaign, is Tulsi Gabbard, who is an Iraq War veteran who comes from an unusual family in Hawaii. She was homeschooled. Her father is a New Age figure who is Hindu, eccentric, anti-gay, I think maybe was anti-abortion as well, and she took on a lot of those beliefs and has moved away from them. The Iraq War was a pivotal moment for her. She saw the betrayal of America's troops by George W. Bush and the destruction of a nation through our policy of regime change, and she is now running a protest campaign against America's policy of regime change and against the new Cold War. And she's the only candidate, listen carefully, who uses the word peace in her speeches. When Bernie talks about foreign policy, he talks about democracy and human rights. That's a code for American soft power that we can impose on countries that we want to sanction. Tulsi Gabbard talks about peace because that's a code for negotiations and making treaties with countries, including North Korea, which deserves a peace treaty with South Korea that all Koreans want so they can reunite with their families and live without the threat of destruction. And Tulsi Gabbard has been excellent on speaking out about that because Hawaii is within missile range. But she hasn't said anything about Palestine. I know she's moving on the issue. In the past, she was horrible on this issue, and she's moving on it. She voted against recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, along with only 80 other members of Congress. And as someone who's such a minor candidate, she can hear from you, and she needs to hear from you that she needs to speak up for the rights of Palestinians in order to get small donations that you should give for someone like this who can move Bernie on foreign policy, who I consider a front runner right now. Now, we've talked about the Democratic Party. There's not much to say about the Republican Party. Thanks to Donald Trump, the whole mask is off with Israel, and we know what it is now. The embassy's been moved to Jerusalem. Sheldon Adelson funded it, one of Trump's biggest donors, the sugar daddy of the pro-Israel lobby. Israel's essentially declared itself an apartheid state with the nation-state law. Donald Trump has no interest in a two-state solution, so that fantasy is gone. I don't know why groups that are dedicated to it, like J Street, have a reason to exist any longer. Donald Trump has made it clear that this is a one-state reality, and it can be either an apartheid state or a binational state with equality for all, and we should make it the latter one. The GOP, which supports Donald Trump, is the rock-solid base of pro-Israel support from now on into the future. So if you look at those polls that I mentioned about Democratic attitudes, the Republican attitudes are like 80% in support of Israel. I don't know why they ask them, by the way, do you support Israel or Palestine? It's kind of crude, but 80% in support of Israel, like 20% for Palestine. It's because of some of the shared values I talked about between Mad Anthony Wayne and Mad David Ben-Gurion, or whoever, Mad Moshe Ya'alon. These are true across the world. Shared settler colonial values. Israel was a very close ally of apartheid South Africa. Shared racist values, shared white nationalist values. Israel is, under Netanyahu, becoming very close to the nationalist governments of Eastern Europe and Central Europe, like Poland, the Polish government, where there was just an anti-Iran conference held. The Brazilian government of Jair Bolsonaro, I mentioned, is a huge supporter of Israel. And the Brazilian government is also a product of Pentecostal infiltration of Latin America, which had been funded as a strategic weapon during the Cold War by the Rockefeller brothers, starting in the 1970s through the World Church in Brazil. And Jair Bolsonaro is the first candidate to emerge to really use the rise of Pentecostal charismatic Christianity in Brazil as a springboard. And here you have Christians United for Israel, Pastor John Hagee, someone who was actually created partly by AIPAC. Christians United for Israel was created by AIPAC. And this group bases its support for Israel on premillennial dispensationalist theology. The idea that the hill of Megiddo in Jerusalem, where Hagee leads tours to, is the future landing pad for the Messiah. Jesus will come down on a throne. Everything will be cool, and I will burn in an everlasting lake of fire. An everlasting lake of fire. It's like, I would think a lake of fire would just burn me up and it would hurt, but no, it'll last forever. Because I wasn't born again in the blood of the Lamb. If you're a mainline Christian, you're going to be in the lake of fire with me. If you're not born again. If you're a Palestinian Christian from Bethlehem who is a direct descendant of the disciples, you're going to be doing the backstroke in the lake of fire. And of course, if you're a Muslim, they're going to turn it up like to whatever the maximum. Like Spinal Tap turns its amps up to 11. This is, and it all, it's all written there. Not actually in the Bible, but in the Kirk Cameron films and the Tim LaHaye Left Behind series, which actually form a substitute Bible for these characters who don't want to know about Jesus, the Prince of Peace, who challenged the principalities. Pastor Hagee has said that John Hagee talks like this. He's kind of a faith healer. All your diseases will go away. He talks like that. He actually said this. He said, when the Antichrist returns, he will be homosexual and half Jewish as Hitler was with fierce features. Homosexual and half Jewish as Hitler was with fierce features. Those were his exact words. And I produced that video after John McCain accepted Hagee's endorsement in the 2008 presidential race. This is a guy who said that Adolf Hitler was half Jewish and that the Antichrist will be homosexual with fierce features. And like every Republican candidate is vying for his endorsement, and AIPAC created his group. This is an anti-Semite. I mean, and he never gets called that. It's me. I'm the anti-Semite because, I think that I can live next, we can sing Kumbaya with Palestinians. So this viciousness is partly a product of the courting of Christian Zionists, where for the first time in my Twitter mentions, I find Gentiles calling me an anti-Semite because they are told by the official mainstream Jewish communal world, which revolves around AIPAC and pro-Israel support, that by merely supporting Israel, they are more Jewish than I am. and then they feel entitled to denigrate and delegitimize me as a Jew when they've never had a bar mitzvah or gone through the post-birth pain of a bris. It's just in me, you know what I mean? I just feel it. I want it back. I can never have it back. At the same time, I mean, I'm able to withstand the attacks because I'm 33% less sensitive. So. The viciousness is not limited to our country. Many of you have experienced the viciousness here from our friends at the Jewish Federation. The viciousness has taken place in the UK. The first time I visited the UK to speak about Palestine, I was invited by a backbencher in the parliament to speak in the parliament. His name was Jeremy Corbyn. And when Jeremy Corbyn was nominated by 100,000 new Labour members to be the Labour leader, I was attacked in the Daily Mail. And they said that Jeremy Corbyn invited an anti-Semite. And the smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn began because he was a lifelong anti-racist who comes from the long socialist anti-racist tradition of the UK. He supported Palestinian humanity and Palestinian rights because he was an anti-racist, and therefore he's demonized as an anti-Semite, and an anti-Semitism scandal was manufactured by the Tony Blair wing of the Labour Party so that yesterday Chris Williamson, who is a socialist, strong anti-racist, who opposes anti-Semitism, one of the biggest firebrands and supporters of Corbyn, was suspended from the Labour Party for saying what I just said, which is that the anti-Semitism scandal is a contrivance designed to prevent the progressive future that so many people in the UK who are finding that their public benefits are disappearing, that they want. And that's the role that the pro-Israel lobby plays in the West, is to prevent progressive change by ginning up these phony scandals. We saw them do it most recently to Representative Ilhan Omar, who is my favorite new member of Congress. And what did she say? She said, it's all about the Benjamins when it comes to Israel. It's not all about the Benjamins. It's also about the Hagees. It's also about the Adelsons. It's also about so many other values that people simply wrongly, unfortunately, believe in. But the Benjamins are a factor. And what they did to her proves her point. They forced her to apologize. And there was this condescending line that I even saw within from progressive members of Congress, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's clearly much more ambitious than Ilhan Omar. She's not as willing to tell the truth. And she said Ilhan has a lot to learn, and she has done a lot of learning from our Jewish friends. And I said, what kind of learning does Ilhan Omar have to do? She is a refugee from a war zone in Somalia who moved to a community in Minneapolis that has been under FBI surveillance and targeted with manufactured terror cases for years. I think we have a lot to learn from her. I think all of us should be asking her what we could know from her experience, and her community supports Palestinians because that's the natural thing for them to do, and she's representing them, but she's not allowed to even represent her own community. It's like somebody else is in charge, and that somebody else is the Israel lobby. So it's not just about the Benjamins that Beto O'Rourke changed his position. It's not just about the Benjamins that Ilhan Omar issued a half-hearted apology against her own will. It's also about the fear. The fear can strike you in so many different ways. The fear of a primary candidate being run against you. The fear of a candidate even being run against you in a city council election or even a student presidential election. The Israel lobby works even at the student body level. And the fear of reputational damage. I'm not running for office, obviously. I'm just going to tell the truth. I'm not running for anything. Plus, my last name's Blumenthal. I don't know how Richard Blumenthal got in there, but, I don't know. I just don't feel, I don't feel qualified for office. I'm not enough of a sociopath. But they can still damage me. And ever since I started speaking out on Palestine, there has been an operation targeting me and following me. There have been Twitter accounts dedicated to denigrating me. I was falsely accused of inspiring a neo-Nazi to go on a shooting spree at Jewish community centers in Kansas City